I'm going to start by telling a story. I didn't have a church wedding. I was married in the Santa Clara County Courthouse in the judge's chambers. And to make the petition to get married, we had to file in small claims court, and it cost us exactly $1.50 to get married. And my husband and I, we made a terrible faux pas by not bringing witnesses with us. So we had to ask the Asian couple who was getting married on the same day to be our witnesses. So on our wedding certificate, we have the signatures of two complete strangers as our witnesses. On that day, the judge that married us was a very large, rotund, and imposing man. He had just been in a session, he had just come from a session in court, and so he had on his black robes and was clearly very irritated at having to perform marriage ceremonies in the middle of his day. So there we were, very dutifully and rapidly repeating the phrases and the various things that we needed to repeat in order to fulfill our marriage vows. And while this was happening, the judge's assistant was in the other corner of the room making popcorn and playing music on the radio, which I thought was a particularly strange choice of entertainment. So we succeeded in becoming married, as did the Asian couple. And on our way out of the courthouse in the elevator, the Asian couple very kindly invited us to a dinner to celebrate our marriage, and we just as kindly declined, which they were greatly relieved at. Our celebration dinner was a hot dog at the hot dog stand out in front of the courthouse, where two prostitutes had just been released from jail. Conversation ensued, and they started asking David and I questions, and we soon realized that they thought that David was my pimp. And they could perhaps be forgiven making this mistake, because the telltale sign was that he had my hot pink stiletto shoes in the pockets of his jacket. It was a surreal day, to say the least. I've just made a simulacrum of myself. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that term, an easy way to think of the simulacrum is something that's repeated so frequently that it loses its connection with its original. You may be wondering how that story has lost connection with me, because clearly I've just told it. It's lost connection in several ways, actually. It's taken on an identity of its own. So it's no longer a series of free-floating memories that I have of the day, but it's the story of my wedding. What I remember are not the sensations or the sensory perceptions or the memories of that day, but the series of events that go into telling that story. I don't have any emotions in telling that story, it's just a funny story that I tell from my life. And perhaps most importantly is the story is out of sync. So it presents a past self in real time with a real-time identity. And it disrupts your perception of who you know Jane Boyer to be, those of you who know me. The title of my thesis is The Eye That I Tell, an autobiographical tale of a simulacral self. And in my PhD, I'm in the second year of my PhD, it's fine art PhD, I'm researching the relationship between autobiography and simulacra, and how that affects the views of self in artist-curator practice. For this presentation, however, I'm going to present a comparison between two recent projects on autobiography. The first is When a Wall Gets an Autobiography, which was part of Studio, presented earlier this year with Kelsey Davenport, Denise Johns, and Gemma Marmalade. In this project, I built an autobiography of a wall, which resulted in significant findings for my research on simulacra. The second project is Marilyn's Wedding, which is installed downstairs in Ruskin Gallery. This is a group of actual autobiographical work, all based around a single image of me at age 3. The two projects present different functions of the simulacrum. What I've done is to put together a comparison grid of outcomes from both projects. This does several things. Firstly, it compares the presence of the artist within the artworks. So the artist as creator and the artist as artist as subject. It shows how the presence changes as there's a change in the simulacrum. So for example, the abstract repetitions, which take on a different significance as they become a repeated pattern, as opposed to figurative representations that create a fluctuation in impact of visual presence within the work. This also contrasts the eye artist, what I call the eye artist, between the two projects. So the eye artist behind the scenes and the eye artist who is the subject and object of the work. It also shows how characteristics in works change or remain consistent. For example, displacement as an abstract visual and a figurative device of communication. It may also show the mutability of visual language. So for example, the clasped hands relate to the chevron tread, which you can't see very well, unfortunately, the chevron tread in the tread of the paint roller and the cross stitch. Seeing these images placed side by side allow for an interpretive analysis of how this visual trope may carry meaning between the two artistic genres. I'll talk a little bit about each project. This is from When a Wall Gets an Autobiography, and the first thing that I did was to paint the wall black. By doing this, features and flaws of the wall became visible, and immediately a question of the simulacrum became apparent. Which was the real wall? Was it the white wall, or was it the wall that was revealed by painting it black? I collected all sorts of ephemera to build a history of events and memories for the wall. So things like the tape that I used to protect the edges of the wall as I painted it black, paint chips that peeled away from the wall as I painted, and the trimmed excesses from photographs that I used within the installation of the wall. Also, the drop cloth became an archival record of the activity that happened on the wall. This ephemera gave me objects to work with that had direct relation to the wall to build its history. The objects became events in time that could be replicated, moved, or removed to produce displacements and non-synchronous presence. Paint became a recording material, so it recorded the nuances of the wall as well as my presence interacting with the wall. The paint became a conveyancer of meaning in an exploitation of properties. What I discovered through doing this was exploiting the significance of a property is an unrepresentable, incommunicable, immaterial thing related to the simulacrum. It was the immaterial materiality of the paint. Pierre Klasowski was a French novelist, reluctant philosopher, and self-proclaimed maniac who was highly influential for the post-structuralists Gilles Deleuze, Michel Foucault, and others, especially with regard to the simulacrum. Klasowski said, "The simulacrum, in its imitative sense, is the actualization of something in itself incommunicable and non-representable." It's the Deleuzian view of simulacrum, informed by Klasowski, that I used for the basis of my research. Deleuze saw the simulacrum as a positive motivator of change, and something which carries the potential for change within it. Deleuze said, "If it's true that representation has identity as its element, and similarity as its unit of measure, then pure presence, such as it appears in the simulacrum, has the disparate as its unit of measure. In other words, always a difference of difference as an immediate element." What I discovered through When a Wall Gets an Autobiography is that I was implicated directly in the simulacrum. I became a simulacrum model. So anything that appeared on the wall could be traced back directly to my experience or interaction with the wall. I became an activator of change, So as the changes appeared on the wall, they were only related, they were only related to my thought processes. There were no visible signs of any system or anything that could give the viewers any indication of what was coming. In Marilyn's Wedding, which I based on Andy Warhol's Gold Marilyn, I'm the object of the simulacrum. I'm turned into a fantasy, attracting fascination and desire through the work, and eliciting emotional responses from the viewers. Marilyn's Wedding deals with imposed fantasies of an adult world on a child. Andy Warhol's Gold Marilyn dealt with distortions of fame and objects of desire. He made Marilyn into an icon and rendered her image as readable and as recognizable as a logo. The advantage that I have in my installation downstairs is that I can respond to this. While the works in the installation in the gallery show idealization and objectification, I'm able to respond to that. So these works impose the situation of objectification, while at the same time presenting my response to that objectification. Like Gold Marilyn, Marilyn's Wedding invokes the simulacrum in two ways initially. First, it presents a serial image that consumes its referent, and it presents an operational sign that reduces readability to functions of repetition. It's an interjection of a past self into present time identity. It disrupts real-time experience of me and renders me into a fantasy in present time. I become both subject and object of my own objectification, turned simultaneously into mutable signifier, rendered into a spectacle of myself. It's important to note that I make a distinction between autobiography and the autobiographical. Autobiography is essentially a timeline of events in a person's history, whereas the autobiographical are standalone storied elements that take on an identity of their own. The autobiographical is directly related to the simulacrum. Autobiographical snippets function in the same way as the examples I've used in this presentation, so the images of me as a child and the story of my wedding. They function to bridge a gap in time and also to make the self a mutable self that can move between situations easily. They stand as an explanation of wider experience, and they result in verbal descriptions of rendered as mental images of a past self brought into present time, often sitting incongruously with present real-time identity. They are simulacra of a self, and simultaneously they render the self into simulacra. At the same time, autobiographical stories become active, insinuating themselves in the mind of the listener or viewer, creating imagery and impressions that only a listener or viewer keeps and takes away. This is what I call simulacra as vector, and it's something we engage in every day in conversation. In this presentation, I've shown examples of how theory informs practice and how practice forms theory, which I hope has resulted in an expansion of your understanding of the simulacrum. Thank you.